The day began with the sound of rope over a well pulley and the scrape of a tin bucket, a small music our town depended on. I was in the doorway of my office, sleeves rolled, watching sun bleed down the ridge onto Main Street. Dust lifted under a freight wagon and hung there like a held breath. We had a dry wind and the sort of June light that turns every nailhead bright. Folks like to say water is a quiet tyrant. It doesn't shout, just wait you out until your tongue cracks and your cows blink slow. I kept the jail unlocked as usual and swept grit off the step with a willow broom, making little crescent moons in the fine dirt. Across the way, the judge's office window showed a map tacked up crooked, blue pencil lines for ditches, and a river that had never in its life followed any pencil. Her name was Judge Leona Pike, and she'd been given to steady measures. She wore her hair pinned clean and kept a small fern on her sill that made a brave triad green in the heat. When she called for a meeting, she didn't bang a gavel. She sent a boy with a folded note and a peppermint. I had the note in my shirt pocket, warming to me through the cloth. The peppermint I saved for later, out of respect for its promise. I wasn't the one in trouble with water, but a sheriff in a dry town keeps an ear for the sound of it. We had 2 claims tugging at the same thin braid of river. Upstream, Cole Brannan held cattle and a way of looking at problems like they were post to tamp straight. Down in the flats, Mara Dunn coaxed carrots and alfalfa into rows and stacked her worries in sacks like seed. Both had papers, both had history, and the river had its own ideas. I locked my office out of habit and crossed to the judge's place. The boy on the step pushed the door open with his foot, careful not to drop a wrapped jar. "Morning, Sheriff," he said. "Judge says you might want to look at this." He set the jar on the table. River water. Clear enough where it had settled in glass, though a silt line lay like a faint ring of coffee at the bottom. Leona stood by the map with her sleeves rolled. "Same as mine." "You know why," she said. "I can guess," I said. "That jar looks like proof a man can hold water if the lid's right." "Paper's a kind of lid," she said, and smiled in a way that wasn't a joke. She tapped the blue lines. "Cole's ditch is a bite too wide. Mara's timing has her gates open when the afternoon surge comes. Both swear it's the other's doing." "The river doesn't swear. It just runs where it can." "Who else is coming?" I asked. "Both of them," she said, "and a surveyor with a chain, if I can find him awake." We didn't have long to wait. Brannan came first, tall and sun-creased, hat like a roof he carried from habit. He set his gloves on the chair and didn't sit. The door opened again, and in came Mara Dunn with a ledger tucked to her side like a loaf of bread. She nodded to me, a quick thank you for some old thing I'd nearly forgotten. Her runaway mule returned, or a door hinge hammered back straight. Her boots were clean, but the laces were dark with old wet. "Judge," Brannan said, "you called." "I did," Leona said, and she sent the boy for a second chair. "I aim to settle this without either of you spending your planting or your winter feed money on lawyers who live 2 towns over." Mara eased the ledger onto the table and set a pencil on the seam. "I can show my turns," she said, "every day since thaw." Brannan touched the brim to me and then to the judge. "I can show a ditch that's fed cattle on that bench since before anyone called it a bench." Leona held up a hand, not to stop them, but to level the air. She used her soft voice, the one that made people hush to hear it. "I'll listen," she said, "but first, I'll tell you what the river told me this morning." It struck me then she'd been down there at daybreak. The hem of her skirt showed a tide mark, a darker line like patience left to dry. She moved to the window and pointed not at the map, but at the ridge, where heat was already trembling. "The snow went early," she said. "Everything after that is a matter of inches and keeping your word." She had a way of making words sit down inside a room and wait their turn. Brandon's jaw worked once and then still. Mara uncapped the jar and sniffed it, as if truth had a smell. Leona's hand rested on the map, palm flat. "The law allows for joint control," she said. "Joint benefit, joint duty. We can split days, split hours, split the cost of a man to watch the gates. But paper splits have to be kept, and I've watched the both of you try to keep your own half without trusting the other half to exist." Myra said nothing and traced her finger over the ledger-stitched edge, a seam neat as any vow. Brannan looked at the jar and then out the window. I heard the street wheel and the murmur of the saloon's piano with its sour middle C. "The river doesn't care about fences," Leona said. "It cares about banks and gravity. The town cares about you not killing each other with shovels." "No one's killed," Brannan said. "No one will be," I said, "because that was my work." Leona considered them both a long, square breath. "I'm going to say something that'll sound odd," she said. "I want it to land quiet. Not a joke, not a trick." Brannan's hat tilted back a hair. Mara's hands went still on the ledger. "A paper marriage," Leona said. "You two sign for joint household where water rights join with it. Not love first. Not even later, if that isn't your road. Just duty first. Fair partnership on paper. Shared claim to the ditch as household property, a year to hold steady. At the year's end, we revisit. If you want out, there's a clause. You leave with what you brought, and a fair share for work done." Silence took the room as if it had been waiting in the corner to be invited in. I heard a fly, and the clock's slow tongue. Mara blinked once and looked at the fern on the sill, its leaves thin as a girl's wrist. Brannan's hands found his gloves and then left them. "That isn't the way I was raised," Brannan said finally. "Marriage for feelings," Leona nodded. "Feelings get a chance either way. The water doesn't. It needs rules now. I'm not marrying your hearts. I'm marrying your paper so your gates don't quarrel." Mara's voice, when it came, was dull from worry ground fine. "If I sign, I keep my land." "You keep your land," Leona said. "He keeps his cattle. The ditch is household so long as the union stands. Household owes taxes, maintenance, and water to the town's lower gardens as chartered. Profit and shortage shared by the ledger you already keep, Mrs. Dunn." Mara glanced at me as if to borrow a second opinion a man might give while fixing a wheel. I shrugged in a way I hoped meant sensible. "You can't eat paper," I said, "but you can starve without it." Brannan's gaze found the jar and hardened. "Folks will talk." "Folks already talk," Leona said. "They talk whether you're right or wrong, dry or wet. They'll talk until winter, and then talk about the cold instead." Mara sat. Brannan remained standing. "Both were proud in the way you get, when pride is the last cheap thing to hold." The judge waited them out with the patience of bedrock. She had a pen ready and a stack of blanks. "Before you answer," I said, "because a sheriff sometimes points to the ground so folks see the hole, I'll put it plain. If you leave here both stubborn, I'll stand the river twice a day with a watch, and I'll choose which gate opens when. I won't like it, you won't like it, but I'll do it. And if anyone moves a post by moonlight, I'll know." Brannan's mouth went to a thin line. He wasn't a moonlight kind of man. He was noon. He looked to Mara like a rider looks to the weather on the horizon. She looked back the same, steady, measuring. Her ledger lay between them like a plank across water. "Paper first," Mara said, and the words sounded as if she was testing the fit of a tool in her hand. "Feelings later, or not at all, so long as work is fair." Brannan rubbed his thumb over the edge of his glove. "Fair," he said. "Put it in." Leona slid the blanks forward and uncapped the ink. "I'll put more than fair," she said. "I'll put good faith in ink, and I'll add a town witness." They both looked to me again. I nodded. "I can vouch for a calendar and a watch," I said, "and I can make coffee at the gates when folks forget to eat." The judge's fern caught a small draft and lifted. Papers rustled like leaves in a far-off wash. Leona wrote in her neat hand, the letters standing upright like fence boards. No lean, no flourish. She read as she wrote, the way you do when you want words to act like stones laid true. Household for the purpose of shared water rights. Ledger maintained daily. Disputes presented each week on Saturdays, afternoon bell, before sundown. A clause that said either party could claim hurt with proof and be heard clean. A clause that said no harm to person or stock would be borne alone if it came from the ditch. When the pen paused, Brannan cleared his throat. No one will make me share debt for feed I didn't buy. No one will, Leona said. But if the ditch gives short and your calves go thin, the household acknowledges the loss before God and the ledger, and the other half doesn't gloat. That last part's hard to bind, I said. It's why the preacher will sign as moral witness, she said. He's better than glue. From the street came the soft clatter of a milk cart. I smelled the faint wax of the peppermint in my pocket. The jar sat on the table. A small, clear world with its own slow weather. Leona blew on the ink and slid the paper to them. If you sign, you do it with the knowledge that every gate you lift or lower speaks for two. You will not be alone for a year. Mara set her palm on the paper first, not to claim it, but to feel the cool of the ink through the fibers. A year of not alone, she said. All right. Her voice had a small scrape in it, the grit of resolve. Brannan stood very still. His hat cast a roof-lined shadow on the wall. He was not the sort of man to shrink from weather. He calculated it, built against it, took his losses where they came. The thing that spooked him lived in rooms, not in sky. He looked at Mara, then at me, then back to the jar. I don't need a wedding supper, he said. I need my calves watered. If this is the right lid, I'll try it. Try with both hands, Leona said. A lid that's half set spills easy. He took the pen, wiped the nib with his thumb as if it were a tool he knew, and put his name down with letters that rode the line like iron on a rail. Mara followed, neat and small. Leona added hers last, and then turned the paper for me. I signed where it said witness, the same hand I used on arrest warrants and baby names in the town book. Understanding both were a kind of promise. We'll post the notice private, Leona said. No need for courthouse steps. I'll set the preacher to bless the paper and the ditch, not your heart. You'll meet at the head gate at dawn tomorrow to begin. Mara nodded. I'll bring my wrench and a tin pail of coffee, she said. I'll bring a chain length, Brannan said. We'll count what's fair in links. Leona reached for a second sheet and wrote in small letters, almost delicate. Vows, she said quietly, and I looked up. Not holy ones, working ones. She read them, eyes on the paper, voice even. I will lift when you lift. I will shut when you shut. I will not blame the river for my late hand, nor you for the river's mine. If short comes, I will share the short. If plenty comes, I will share the plenty. Fair first, feelings later. She set the sheet between them. You can copy it or burn it. I'd copy. Mara smiled with one corner of her mouth. I'll copy, she said, and she wrote those lines in the back of her ledger in a small, tireless hand. Brannan didn't copy. He said them under his breath once, each like a nail sunk to depth. They left together by accident, because the door swings only one way. On the step they paused as the bright outside hit their eyes. Mara tipped her chin and went right. Brannan stuffed his gloves in his back pocket and went left. Leona corked the ink and turned the jar with a thumb and forefinger. Town might sleep easier, she said, not pleased, not triumphant, just measuring. Sleep needs a thing to sleep on, I said, and tapped the fresh paper. A cot would do. She looked at my sleeve, where a line of dust had made a pale river across the cloth. Your work isn't done, she said. It never is, I said, but sometimes it's quieter. I carried the paper to my office to make a copy for the book that holds births, deaths, and other proofs that time has weight. I set the pages beside my coffee cup and, before I sat, I opened the back door to hear the river. It wasn't much sound by noon, just a soft talk against stones. Enough to make a man believe in ink. Afternoon brought a small procession of opinions. Mrs. Lark from the hotel called it unholy, and then called it clever. The blacksmith laughed once and went back to his anvil. where fairness is exact or the shoe is bad. The preacher came, hat in hand, eyes bright with the pleasure of doing a blessing that smelled of moss. I asked him to come by the head gate at dawn, and he promised, leaning on the word like a friend. Toward evening, I walked the ditch, boots sending up little puffs that settled quick. Dragonflies stitched the air over the slow water. Halfway to the head gate, I found Mara sitting on a rock, her ledger open, not writing. She had a wrench across her lap like a lapdog. Her hair had loosened into two small wisps by her ears. "You bring a pail?" I asked. "Coffee," she said, "and a strip of bacon for bribing stubborn men." "They prefer salt," I said. "Bacon's got salt," she said, and let her hand rest on the wrench. We didn't say more for a while. The ditch made its quiet procession. A meadowlark tried out 3 different endings to the same song. I could see Brannan's fence line on the bench, straight as if it had been poured that way. "Do you mind the talk?" I asked. "I mind the drought," she said. "Talk dries slower." A gust came and set a small brown eddy spinning over the ditch. It went nowhere, happy to be a circle. Mara watched it like you watch a child try standing. "Paper first," she said, almost to herself. "Feelings later. I can live with that." She closed the ledger and stood. "Tell the judge I'll be there before sun," she said. "If Mr. Brannan comes late, I'll wait. If he comes early, he can watch me drink the first cup." "He'll come on time," I said. She gave me a look that said she'd settle for that. Then she hoisted the pail and the wrench and walked toward the head gate, dust rising from her steps and falling back where it began. I turned for home along the lower gardens. On one fence post, someone had left a ribbon of torn blue cloth, faded near white, tied in a neat bow. It snapped once in the wind, and then lay still, like a promise that hadn't yet found its use. I tucked that picture away in the place I keep things that might matter later. Back at my desk, I wrote the day's line in my ledger. Paper laid for water. Fair first. The light on the wall shifted from gold to the color of old tin. Somewhere up ahead, a child laughed at nothing the river could teach. I set my pencil aside, blew dust from the copy, and turned the lantern's wick down until the room held a small, steady glow. The dawn came in silver and cold, like a coin fresh from mint. A soft fog clung low to the riverbanks, curling around the cottonwoods like breath that wouldn't leave. At the head gate, the preacher stood with his hat pressed to his chest, waiting beside the new sign Leona had painted, "Household Ditch, shared by contract the 12th of June, 85. Mara arrived first, steps firm in the silt. She wore a patched denim coat and gloves cut at the fingers. A steam curl rose from her cup of coffee, and her breath joined it in the pale air. When she saw the preacher, she nodded once. "You bless the water or the paper first?" He gave the small smile warned men keep in a coat pocket. "I bless the work," he said. "That way it stays." Brannan came a few minutes later, leading his horse by the reins. He had a measuring chain looped over his shoulder and a hammer tucked in his belt. The two of them exchanged a wordless look, the sort of quiet that can be peace or stubbornness, depending on the day. Leona and I came last. She had her fern in a small box on the wagon seat, said she'd keep it in the shade till noon. She laid the contract on a plank and held a corner, while the preacher read the lines they'd copied. "Lift when you lift, shut when you shut," he said. "Fair first, feelings later." His voice was soft enough the mist bent closer to hear. When he finished, Brannan touched the brim of his hat. Mara looked to the gate lever, half buried in frost. "Let's open it together," she said. They took opposite sides. The handle was stiff from the night chill. As they leaned in, wood creaked. A bird started in the reeds, and a thin thread of water slid through like the first note of a tune waiting to be learned. Leona wrote the hour in her ledger. "Joint commencement," she said. "Let the records show." The preacher tipped his hat. "And may the good Lord remember which way this ditch runs." By mid-morning, the fog burned off. Mara worked the upstream grate with her wrench. chipping away packed mud, while Brannan marked links of chain from the main gate to the lower run. I stayed near enough to see, but far enough to let them find their rhythm. It came slower than music, but it came. When the sun lifted higher, I set down my coat and poured water from my canteen into my hat. "You two best take a drink before you forget you're made of it," I said. Brannan looked up, sweat cutting pale lines through the dust on his neck. "Sheriff, I've been drinking this river since I had teeth," he said. "Then stretch your legs anyway," I said. "Keeps you from turning into part of the bank. If you're listening along, take a moment. Roll your shoulders, sip some water." Work goes bad when the worker runs dry. By noon, they had the first gate squared and the water flowing clean. Mara noted every quarter turn of the wrench. Brannan measured depth with a marked stick. They disagreed twice, once over the angle of a guide board, once over whether silt should be cleared upstream or down, but each time Leona waited them out. She never raised her voice, only repeated the last fair word spoken. That was enough to move the talk forward. Around 2, the preacher took his leave. He'd blessed the marriage of ink, and that was sermon enough for one day. Leona packed her papers, but before she went, she looked at me. "Stay near," she said. The first quiet after a bargain is when tempers realize what they signed. She was right. By evening, the rhythm turned into weary silence. Brandon's chain clinked slow. Ma rubbed the back of her neck and watched the water level hesitate. "It's holding," I said, mostly to keep the air gentle. "For now," she said. "Rivers remember their old ways. Takes more than paper to teach them manners." Brannan tightened the board. "Same goes for people," he muttered. She didn't rise to it. "Then it's a good thing paper holds." I let the talk rest there. The sky went the color of tarnished silver, the light thin enough to see her breath again. They finished packing tools without another word. As they started back toward town, a flock of geese passed overhead, low and loud, following a line older than any surveyor's mark. Days turned to a slow pattern. Each morning they met at the gate, checked levels, argued, and agreed again. Townsfolk began to forget which side had once claimed what. The ditch ran steady, a thread sewing together two fields that had been strangers. One afternoon in July, a dust storm came up sudden from the south. I found them both crouched by the lower run, trying to keep the silt screens from clogging. Mara's hair whipped loose in the wind, and Brandon's hat went rolling into the brush. They worked without speech, shoulder to shoulder, until the air cleared and the water ran free again. When the quiet came, he handed her the hat. "That's 2 storms you've helped me beat," he said. She shook out the brim. "I only count the ones that stay beat." He almost smiled. "Fair enough." At sundown, the town's children came to the riverbend to skip stones. Their laughter carried across the flats, soft and good. I stood with Leona at the edge of the bridge, watching the two of them walk the ditch line, small against the firelit clouds. "They've learned something about faith," she said. "Maybe about patience," I said. "Same language," she answered. By late August, word spread that Mara's carrots were thick as wrists, and Brandon's calves fattened early. The river ran lower but not dry. One evening, Mara came to my office carrying a folded slip of paper. "Need this added to the ledger," she said. It was a note of debt, her half of a repair to the lower sluice. Signed by her, witnessed by Brannan. I read the figures, modest and clean. "You trust him to keep his part?" I asked. She looked out the window where the lamps were being lit. "I trust the work between us," she said. "The water goes where it should. So do we." Brannan showed up the next morning with a wagon full of boards. He said he'd bring them early so she wouldn't need to ask. I saw her smile then, barely, but real, and I wrote it down in my own mind's ledger as progress not measurable by chain or pint. Summer faded. The first frost came quiet, white as linen over the fields. One night, when I made my rounds, I saw 2 lanterns swinging by the ditch. They moved slow, side by side, stopping now and then to check the flow. Their voices carried just enough for me to hear one line drift clear through the cold. "Lift when you lift," she said. "And shut when you shut," he answered. The sound of it might have been a prayer, or maybe just the right rhythm for work. That was the night I decided the judge's kind of justice, paper and patience, might outlast bullets after all. The town kept sleeping easy, though no one quite knew why. Tomorrow would ask the same small vows, and they'd answer by lifting when they lifted. Autumn came with a hush the river respected. The cottonwoods browned early, coins that didn't stay long before falling. By then, the paper marriage had settled into its own weather, steady, useful, unremarked. The first hint of change was an argument but laughter. Late morning, I rode out and found Mara ankle-deep at the gate, skirt tied at the knees, worrying a stick free. Brannan stood on the bank, giving counsel with mock patience. "You're pulling against the flow," he said. "You'll wear the hinge before you free it." She turned just enough to glare. "Then get in here and show me better, unless that chain's too fine for mud." He stepped in, boots sinking. They wrestled the board loose, took the splash, and went down laughing, quiet, honest, surprised. When they stood, dripping, he looked at her like a man finding more in a partnership than work. She wrung her hem. "Next time, I'll let the stick win." "You won't," he said. She smiled. "Small, sure." Leona heard it from me later and shook her head. "Paper never stays dry long," she said. "That's how you know it's worth keeping." The season leaned harder. Nights bit. Mornings came in silver. Work went on. They still disagreed. Boards, turns, sermons, but learned to end with a nod instead of a door. The water favored balance, not either field. One morning, Brannan came to town without his hat. He stood in my doorway like a man who'd misplaced something he couldn't name. "You got a minute?" "Got several," I said. "Gate lever snapped," he said. "Metal worn through. She's gone for a smith." "That all?" He hesitated. "She called me partner when she left." "Not Mr. Brannan." "Seems right enough," I said. He studied the floorboards. "Didn't sound like business." "Then don't ruin it by treating it like one," I said. He left with his back a little straighter. By early winter, the ditch skinned with ice at night and broke free by noon. One cold afternoon, I found them patching the upper sluice with boards and tar. They worked close, matched in motion. When I dismounted, they turned with that look two people share when a wordless thing is growing and they're not naming it yet. "Need a hand?" I asked. "Got two already," Mara said. "You can stand guard against opinions." "I'll do my best," I said. Brannan hummed while he troweled, slow and half-tuned. A church melody without words. She caught the second line, a soft hum on the same note, simple as steam, warmer than the air had any right to be. When the sluice was sealed, he offered a hand. She took it, sure as rope. "Next thaw," he said, "we ought to raise the east bank. It's cutting close." "I've seen that too," she said. "We can start early, before planting." "Before planting," he repeated, and hope sat easy in the phrase. December brought a different trouble. His mother upriver took lung fever. He left 3 days running to tender, and the gates fell to one pair of hands. She managed, but a log broke loose and wedged the lower grate. She levered alone until her boots filled with ice water. When I reached her, her teeth were knocking. "Don't move," I said, stepping in. "You'll freeze where you stand." "I can't leave it," she chattered. "If it holds, it floods his lower field." "Then I'll take it," I said. We pried till the log slid free. The water gushed dark and fast, carrying the cold like a warning. We stumbled out, soaked and laughing for breath. I wrapped her in a blanket by a small ditch fire. Steam lifted off her coat like chimney smoke. "He'd have done the same," she said. "I know," I said. She watched the flames. "That's the trouble, isn't it?" "What is?" "When you start knowing what the other will do, you stop pretending you don't care." I let the fire answer for me. A hawk screamed far off into the wind. By the time Brannan came back, his mother was mending, and the ditch had held its first ice. He found Mara at the gate, setting bolts. You kept it standing. Mostly it kept itself, she said. But I held the wrench. He smiled, something easy coming back into his shoulders. He looked down the run under thin ice. Judge says the paper runs out come spring. That's what she wrote, she said. We'll need to decide, he said. Paper first. She said, steady, but the words trembled a hair. He pulled a glove and ran his thumb along the lever's cold edge. Then, maybe the paper should match what's already true. She looked up, sun caught in her eyes. Fair first, and feeling second, he said. She let out a breath that fogged the iron. You think it holds? In that order? I think it already has. The river filled the space between them, steady, unbothered. Spring came early again, but without dread. Snowmelt ran clean. Gardens took quick green. When the year's paper ended, we met at Leona's, same table, same room, fern now twice itself. You can dissolve, renew, or amend, she said. Mara opened her ledger. We'd like to amend. Brannan passed a folded sheet, careful letters. Household retained. Clause added for the care and maintenance of each party. Leona raised a brow. Care and maintenance. Mutual, he said. In health and hardship, she read, a smile tucked at one corner. That's a fair word for affection, if ever I heard one. She signed witness again. The preacher gave a simple blessing. May your water never turn against you. Outside, the river ran wide under new sun. They walked side by side to the head gate, no rush. They opened the lever together, same as the first day. The sound rose like applause. She handed him her wrench. Your turn. He shook his head. Ours. They stood a while in the gold. Then they started home the way the water ran. Together, slow, sure. Spring folded into summer before anyone thought to call it news. The fields on both sides of the ditch greened in even measure, and when travelers asked who owned which, folks just said, both. It was simpler that way, and maybe truer. I kept the signed amendment filed beside the old paper, two thin leaves holding a year's worth of learning. Sometimes I pull them out and read the names. Ink steadies what voices can. Leona's fern had outgrown its pot. She gave me a clipping in a jar, said it liked filtered light and a bit of neglect. I set it by my window, where the sun catches the glass toward evening. The leaves curl slow in the heat, then uncurl again, stubborn as people who found a reason to stay. Now and then, I ride the ditch at dusk. The gate boards bear new scars, the kind that come from use, not damage. A strip of faded blue still tied to a fence post near the lower run fluttered once and lay still as if it had finally learned its use. I still see them sometimes. Mara in her field hat, Brannan with his marked rod, working quiet, easy in one another's rhythm. No show, no noise. Just the kind of peace that keeps its own counsel. The river still runs where it wants, but these days it runs true between them. That's all a sheriff can ask of a town, a fair current. A few good names written down, and water enough for what's needed. The peppermint I saved that first day sits in my desk, turned white with time. I leave it there to remind me that promises keep better when they're small and sweet. If you've listened this far, take a breath, maybe a drink of water. Let it remind you, most things worth keeping start as work fairly shared. Until next time, thank you for keeping the lantern lit. More quiet hours wait in the sheriff's playlist.